Russia is pushing back on the idea of Western nations providing security guarantees for Ukraine after the war. Yesterday, the Kremlin's foreign minister said Moscow must be included in any talks about security guarantees and suggested China, Russia's ally, should be among Ukraine's guarantors. He also avoided making any direct reference to a possible summit between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, signaling the Kremlin may be trying to delay planning a bilateral meeting. Meanwhile, the Pentagon's top policy official reportedly told a group of European military leaders the U.S. plans to play a minimal role in those security guarantees. Sources tell Politico defense chiefs from the UK, France, Germany, and Finland are pushing the United States to disclose what it would provide in terms of troops and air assets. Politico also reporting NATO allies becoming increasingly concerned the Trump administration will rely on Europe to ensure that long-term peace. Joining us now, former National Security Advisor under President Biden, Jake Sullivan. Jake, it's good to have you with us this morning. So a lot to digest there, but bottom line is security guarantees for Ukraine are at the center of any peace deal. The question is, what role will the United States play in it? What role, in your view, should the United States play in a security guarantee?
Well, first, just taking a step back, think about where we were 1 week ago and where we are now. 1 week ago, Donald Trump was saying there's got to be an immediate ceasefire or there's going to be consequences. Severe consequences were his words against Russia. 1 week later, after that summit in Alaska, there is no ceasefire, there are no consequences. So Putin seems to be playing a game of rope-a-dope here. And right now, the administration seems to be going along with it. Now, on the question of security guarantees, I think it's really important that first and foremost, Ukraine have the material, the capacity to be able to defend itself and to deter future Russian aggression if we get to a peace deal. One of the things that was in earlier proposals by the Russians was a cap on the amount of weapons that the Ukrainian military could actually have. That should be a total non-starter. And then behind that, both the Europeans and the United States should be providing multiple forms of support to Ukraine to ensure that once this war ends, Vladimir Putin can't turn around a year from now or 2 years from now and start it up again. But as we heard from the Russian foreign minister yesterday, it's not at all clear that the Russians are prepared to go along with that.
So the New York Post this morning, Murdoch's New York Post this morning, Jake, is talking about how the pressure has to be kept on Vladimir Putin. It says Putin continues to ignore peace overtures, continues to kill innocent Ukrainians. Donald Trump must keep the pressure on. I've been asking the question this week. I'll ask you, what is the leverage? If you're talking to the President of the United States and you want to drive Vladimir Putin to a deal, how do you do it?
It comes down to one word, really, oil. Most of Russia's revenue at this point is coming from its daily sales of millions of barrels of oil. Now, we began at the end of the Biden administration to sanction Russian oil companies. Why couldn't we do more? Because a couple years ago, oil prices were really high and supply was short. So actually trying to take a whole lot of Russian barrels off the market was difficult. It would just actually give a huge spike to the price that would both hurt Americans and help Russia. But the situation is very different today. Oil prices are much lower. So President Trump, if he chose, could in fact impose very serious sanctions on Russia's oil sector, drive down Russia's revenues, and really get Putin's attention. And in fact, Russia's own economic officials are saying publicly that Russia's war machine is sputtering. So there is a moment right now, if President Trump were prepared to squeeze harder, to actually put Putin in a place where he'd have to make a much harder call than he has to make right now, when he seems to feel, after Alaska, the pressure really isn't on.
Jake, I'm curious about this idea that Ukraine somehow needs to check with Russia, that we need to check with Russia about their security ongoing. I don't think everyone realized how unprecedented this would be. You know, NATO went from, 12 to, I think, 32 nations. I don't recall us ever asking Russia if it was okay. What has changed? Why is it just Trump's affinity for Putin that all of a sudden we're letting Putin inside the door as to how we keep Ukraine safe if, in fact, we ever get peace?
Well, the way I'd kind of put it is the more things change, the more they stay the same. Actually, 2 years ago, or even 3 years ago, in 2022, shortly after the war started, there were talks between Ukraine and Russia in Istanbul. And there was talk of security guarantees. And at that point, the Russians said, we, Russia and China, have to be part of the security guarantees. And the security guarantees don't kick in unless we agree. Fast forward 3 years, the Russians are saying the same thing. And it's totally unacceptable. Russia's the aggressor in this war. They started it. They are continuing it. As you guys were saying, they are bombarding Ukrainian cities as we speak. So the idea that we would let Russia have a say in security guarantees to Ukraine is a complete non-starter. And what's interesting is I think the Trump team felt coming out of Alaska they'd gotten some big concession on security guarantees from the Russians. In fact, what it sounds like is the Russians are sticking to this same line, the same absurd line, that somehow they, Russia, are going to be one of the security guarantees. We've seen that movie before. And it's resulted in what we see now, which is blatant, naked, nasty Russian aggression against Ukraine. It can't be acceptable, and the United States and Europe have to reject it.
Yeah, good morning, Jake. It's the Kremlin telegraphing Moscow's demands remain maximalist in this war. They haven't budged at all. They're really downplaying the idea of a potential Zelensky-Putin summit. They're saying that's not going to happen anytime soon. Europe has absolutely stepped up in recent years to support Ukraine. So let me ask you this. If the U.S., if Eldridge Colby in the Pentagon says, hey, U.S., our support's going to be minimal here going forward, how can Europe compensate? Or better question, can they compensate? Or will Ukraine inevitably be left short if the U.S. doesn't step up?
Look, the basic arithmetic on this is pretty simple. Europe has funding to be able to pay for weapons to go to Ukraine, but they don't actually have the stuff. The United States has the stuff. And in fact, coming out of the meeting with President Trump on Monday, European leaders said they were willing to put billions of dollars on the table as long as the U.S. was prepared to supply the air defense material, money for drones, money for artillery, and other things. Ultimately, the United States has got to stay in the game here if Ukraine is going to have the tools it needs to be able to effectively defend itself. And that means that we can't have a circumstance in which the U.S. washes its hands and walks away. That would be a disaster for Ukraine. It would be a disaster for the United States as well. And so I hope President Trump overrules his defense chief and says, no, we are going to do what I told the Europeans we were going to do, which is Europe can put some money on the table, but we're going to continue to supply Ukraine with the tools it needs.
Yeah, President Trump has said publicly that it was going to be a strong security guarantee. Obviously, Pete Hegseth and others around him have pushed back in the past. Jake, looking at it militarily and politically, does it make the most sense that the way the United States provides support, provides security guarantees is through the air? With air power?
I think that there is I think that the United States could help Ukraine actually build its own capacity, including its own air capacity. And during the Biden administration, we supplied the Ukrainians with a number of F-16s. I think we could dramatically ramp that up so that the U.S. is essentially playing a role of command and control, of intelligence, of targeting, of other forms of support while the Ukrainian Air Force gets built out in full. That's something we started in March of 2023. It's now August of 2025. I think that Ukraine has come a long way and can go much further. My basic view in this is that the core of an effective Ukrainian security guarantee is a powerful and purposeful Ukrainian military with the backing of the United States and Europe, not with us substituting for Ukraine. And this is something that we still don't know if the Russians will tolerate, because one of their demands along the way, as I said before, has been this cap, this limit on what Ukraine can actually possess in terms of military capability. And I think we just have to reject that coming and going.
Former White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, always great to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thanks.